and give it to both of us. Okay, this third party is going to give both of you the same key, and you will communicate with one another using that. Okay? And this third party in this case is called a key distribution center. Okay? So here is basically how it will work. So Alice and Bob want to communicate. Alice contacts the KDC with a message saying, I'm Alice, I want to communicate with Bob, generate a key for us. Okay? So the KDC is going to generate a one-time session key, which is actually here called a key for Alice and Bob. K and so subscript Alice and Bob means that it generated a key for Alice and Bob to communicate. Now this key has to be sent to both Alice and Bob so that they can start communication. Okay? You can't just send the key unencrypted, and then somebody else can intercept the key and figure out what the message is. So the key has to be sent securely to Alice and Bob. That's where the problem arises. Okay? So in this case, what we will assume is both Alice and Bob, because they have they trust the key distribution center, they have pre-generated a key that Alice can communicate encrypt in an encrypted way to the KDC, and Bob can also communicate in an encrypted way to the KDC. So what the KDC can do, the key distribution center, is take your session key and encrypt it with the key that they share, the KDC and Alice share, which is this key here. So this the session key goes encrypted to Alice. Here the same session key also gets encrypted to Bob, but using a different key that only Bob and the KDC. Okay, that has to be predetermined for all of this to work. Okay, so if you have those keys set up, then you can essentially send the session key. Now the same key KA and KB is known to Alice and Bob, and they can use that for subsequent communication. Okay. So this is the equivalent of asking a third party to generate a key for you. The third party securely gives the key to you, and then you use that key to communicate. Is that clear? Sorry? That's a good point. I think so the question is, how is the first set of key distributed? Typically you can't distribute it over a network, because then that means you have to re-encrypt it. So this has to be done in an offline fashion. It's like, let's say you go to your KDC personally, and then they load your machine with a key. Okay, so it's not going over any unencrypted channel. How that is done is not part of this protocol. That has to be done using a different mechanism that's not part of the protocol itself, and that mechanism has to be secure. You can't send it by email or some such thing, because that's not going to work. Okay, so the assumption is you can take your machine and show up at the KDC, they will give you a key there, you put it on the machine, and it's done. At that point you have got the key. Okay, so that, but it's an important problem. That original key is not given in a secure way, you're going to. So here is a different protocol that is not going to depend on a third party at all. Okay. So if I want to communicate with my friend and I do not want to depend on a KDC to give me the key, how do the two of us agree on a key? Okay, so no KDC involved. So here we are going to rely on, this one is actually the same as the other one, so we'll just skip that. The one I was going to talk about is here. Okay, so this one is going to rely on public key cryptography. Okay. So what you are going to do is you are going to assume that each of Alice and Bob have generated a pair of public and private keys, and they published their private keys. Sorry, not private key, that would be bad. They published their public keys. Okay. So the public keys are known. So then what Alice can do is she can say, I'm Alice, here is a nonce, and she can take Bob's public key, which she knows and everyone else knows, and encrypt these two pairs of integers or strings, saying, I'm Alice, here's a nonce, send it off to Bob. Because it is encrypted, this K plus B is actually the book's notation, but it essentially means it's encrypted with Bob's public key. So this message can only be decrypted by Bob, because only Bob has his private key. So Bob will decrypt the message, and in the message is going to say, I am Alice, here is a nonce. Okay? So what Bob is going to then do is generate a new nonce, second nonce, which is called R of B, and then also generate a key, randomly generate some key, K, A, B. Okay, and then encrypt the entire message saying, here is your nonce back, okay, that you sent, here's a new nonce. once in a lifetime integer, and I also generated a key that we can use. And all of these three entities are then encrypted with Alice's public key, which Bob knows. Okay? So now this message can only be decrypted by Alice. Okay? So Alice is going to get the message, she is going to find that her nonce has come back, so there's no replay attacks. Okay? You're using nonces to prevent replay attacks, because we'll never reuse that nonce. So your nonce came back, Bob also sent a nonce so that you cannot do a reverse attack in reverse, and you got a key. So then what Alice is going to do is take the nonce that Bob sent. Now she is going to then encrypt it with the session key and send it back. Okay, so then Bob knows the session key, Bob can figure out that the nonce that he generated has come back. So you exchange nonces two directions, you generated a random key that you sent in a secure way. Okay, is that clear? This doesn't involve a KDC. Two parties are agreeing on a key, okay, by exchanging nonces, and one of them generates the key and sends it off to the other using an encrypted version. Now again, the security of this protocol depends critically on the ability to securely get public keys. Okay? So we are assuming that public keys are well known, but well known doesn't mean everybody's public key sitting on your computer. You're going to get it from somewhere. Okay, and that has to be in a secure way. So if you go to somebody's website and download it, you better be sure that whatever public you're downloading hasn't been tampered with. Nobody broke into the web server at midnight and replaced that key with somebody else's key. So when you actually get the key, you are getting somebody else's. So although people publish their public keys on their web page, which seems to be quite popular, it's not a secure way of distributing public keys at all. Okay, because there is no security. In fact, the HTTP may not even be secure. You may be sending unencrypted HTTP message. That means even in transit, somebody could alter your HTML page and send you bad content. Okay? So the assumption here is there is a way to actually distribute public keys securely. Okay? How to do that we will look at. Okay? All of these ways by which saying I go to somebody's web page or they send it to me encrypted by email doesn't work. Okay? What you need is something called a certificate, which you probably must have heard of. That's the only secure way of actually distributing your public key. Okay. So now let's look at how you do this using a trust. So here is the secure way of actually extracting public keys. Okay. So here what we are going to do is we are going to assume there's a trusted server that is responsible for distributing public keys. Okay. So if you want to go to get a public key, you are going to go to the server and ask for the key. So Bob and Alice want to communicate. They don't know each other's public key. They go to a trusted server and say, give me your public key. The way you are going to do this is you are going to send a message to the trusted server saying, give me Bob's key. You are assuming that you know the server's public key first. And you send that message. And the trusted server looks up the database and sends you saying, here is Bob's public key. And so the server also not Alice's public key, it is going to be encrypted with Alice's public key so she can decrypt it and extract it. Okay. So you can use a trusted third party, in this case it's a server, to get public keys. Okay, this is the actual basis by which digital certificates are sent. Okay. Essentially the server, this is not a way to do digital certificates, but the way digital certificates work is you want to distribute a public key, you go to a server saying here is a public key, please sign it. Okay, server is going to sign it. So now if you present to someone else saying, so the server is going to say this key belongs to Bob and here is the value of the key. Okay, and then sign the whole thing. So that is called a digital certificate. You can go and present that and they are going to sign it with a private key, so you can go present that to anyone. And since the certificate's public key is known, anyone can decrypt the message and then see that the server has signed it. If you all trust the server, you should then believe that that is Bob's key, not somebody else's key, because only the server could have signed that key. Okay? I'll come back to that when we do certificates and so on. So we will skip some of this, we'll talk about access control and then come back to some. So those are some basics. Okay, we talked about encryption, a little bit, we talked about authentication, we talked about key exchange. So all of these are very fundamental building blocks to build higher level applications, which now we are going to start talking about for the rest of whatever half an hour that we have left. So we're going to do a little bit of a context switch here. So now we are thinking about how to implement secure networking protocols, secure applications, and so on. Okay, so let's assume you are a large company, okay, that wants to ensure that their data is secure, the servers are secure, and so on. Okay, so they will use a number of different mechanisms to ensure the security of their system. Okay. You may have things like firewalls to prevent unauthorized access from outside. You will ensure that access to anything sensitive requires a username, password. You also assume that any encryption, any communication from between machines is encrypted. Okay, you don't actually use unsecure channels to communicate and so on. You may also have things like access control lists. So that say here, those are also called ACLs in the distributed system. So every object, which could be a server, it could be a file, it could actually be an object in the sense of a distributed object, will have with it an access control list. The access control list is simply a list that says who has permissions to access this object and what kinds of permissions do they have. Okay, so you can say somebody can read the object, somebody can modify the object, somebody can do some other operations on the object, it will delete and so on. So an access control list is simply a list of all the users and what operations they are permitted to perform on the object. Okay. So now if a request comes in saying do the such and such to the object, you basically go and compare it to the access control and say user X wants to modify this object. Are they allowed to do it? So you look at the ACL and say, do you have those privileges already or permissions? The answer is yes, you go and do it. If no, then you deny. Same concept as accessing files. I mean, you've probably seen this in the context of file systems. Okay. So in Unix world, you have read, write, execute privileges on files. Okay. That's a form of, it's a coarse form of an access control list, where you have only three types of entities: your user, the Unix group, and everyone else, which is called world. And you basically say who can read, write, or execute a file. Okay. In the Windows world, you can actually specify an access control list. Okay. For every file, you can attach a list which says this user can read, write, but not execute. This other user can only read, cannot write or execute. Here's a group that has these kinds of privileges, and so on. So every operation is going to be matched against the access control list to ensure that you are actually only allowing the right users to do the right things. Okay. That concept that is used in file systems is more general than just for accessing files. You can use ACLs for anything: accessing the server, accessing a piece of software, accessing any resources you have in the system, including accessing objects in the distributed object sense of the term. Okay. So this is the simplest form of security, where every operation is checked against a predefined list, saying is this user or this process or application allowed to do this. Okay. And if no, then you prevent it from doing it. Okay. That's the most basic form of protection. But that's not all. If you take an enterprise, you will see that they use a number of different techniques, okay, to protect their data, protect their servers, and so on. So it's a multi-layered approach. So they will have firewalls. Okay? At the edges of their network, they are going to deploy a firewall. A firewall is going to simply check often based on an access control list or a rule, saying which packets from which machines are allowed to go in or out. Okay? So by default, if you aren't authenticated, you cannot actually send traffic inside an enterprise. Okay, the firewall will simply start dropping those packets. Okay? Only if you have authenticated yourself to the firewall will it allow you to access machines inside the firewall. This prevents all unauthorized users from even accessing any machines inside the firewall. Okay? So firewalls allow you to do some network protection. So you can essentially specify rules which are the equivalent of access control that says who is allowed to do what. What ports are accessible, which machines are accessible, which users can access it based on authentication. That's one layer. Another layer is what is called deep packet inspection. Okay. Even if users authenticate themselves to firewalls and so on, doesn't mean that the traffic they send inside the network is not malicious. Okay? It may be that there's a virus on their machine. Okay? They log into their to the firewall and try to access things inside, and then the traffic that is coming in is malicious. Okay? So to do this, you have things called deep packet inspection boxes. What they do is they actually look not just where the packet came from, they look at the contents of the packet, which is called deep packet inspection. You don't look at just the headers, you look at the content. And you can do things like scan for viruses. Okay? Every network packet will be scanned. Okay? Or you can look for certain string which indicate it's coming from some malicious user, and so on. And based on the results of your inspection, you can decide whether each packet is let inside or not. Okay? So that's sort of an evolution of simple firewalls which are going to be based on IP addresses, users, and so on. You are actually looking not where the packet came from, but is there anything bad inside every message. Okay. So those are our DPI. So you of course have virus and email scanners. So if you send an email, it is going to be scanned to make sure your attachments don't have viruses, or every incoming message is scanned to make sure there are no malicious JPEG or malicious PDFs or malicious viruses inside your messages. So that's another way. And then there are a whole bunch of others. You can have things like VLANs, which are virtual LANs. Okay. This allows you to segment traffic that is inside your LAN. Okay. You can say this group of users can only access these machines, and these machines cannot access other machines. Typically, when you are inside a LAN, any machine can access any other machine. You want to prevent that, you can VLAN machines and group them together, and that will give you another layer of protection. And then you can have secure Wi-Fi, where your Wi-Fi communication is actually secured by key and so on. And so you'll have a set of these protocols. There are things like VPNs, which virtual private networks, which you can use to access machines securely from outside, and so on and so on. Okay, so what this is saying is, I just went through a list of things. I don't expect any of you to know anything more about them. But other than the fact that security of a set of machines inside any enterprise, whether it's a university or a company, is a complicated task. It's not like there's going to be one magic solution that will help you protect everything you care about protecting. You have to use a set of different techniques, okay, and a set of, to ensure the right levels of protection. And this is often where things go wrong, because security is such a complex task. If there is any misconfiguration or a problem in any one of them, okay, you can somehow attack that whole, then you are still able to get inside. Okay. If it was a simple task, then it would be not a problem. But since you are using a multi-layered approach, or depending on all of these things are all functioning right all the time, if there's any misconfiguration, there's any problem, then you are going to be in trouble. This is why you can still see security attacks happening despite the use of all of these technologies. Okay? So that's the thing you want to keep in mind, saying security of a distributed system. In this case, the system is a set of machines inside an enterprise. These are really complicated and challenging tasks because of all of these different techniques that have to be used or put in place to make things work. Okay. So with that said, I'm going to talk a little bit about things that you probably know about, and we'll talk a little bit about how security. So if you are accessing websites, you typically use HTTPS, okay, which essentially is layered on what is called SSL, which is a secure sockets layer. So in this case, the network socket, whatever packets you send are automatically encrypted at the network socket layer and decrypted at the other end. I'll tell you a little bit about how SSL works in a little more. Okay. You can have challenge response authentication. Okay. So your bank or PayPal or any of these other sites now have started doing what's also called two-factor authentication. Okay, when you try to access, let's say Gmail does this, if you turn it on, or Apple, you try to specify username and a password, it will actually send you a text message to your phone with a code. Okay. So you not only have to enter a password, you have to enter this one-time code. That's actually a nonce. Okay, so this prevents someone who has intercepted your password from actually accessing the system, because in addition to your password, you need a one-time password, which is your nonce that has been sent to you. And then if you have both of those things, which is I know the password that only you should know, and you have a one-time nonce that has been sent to you through a separate channel. Only then do you authenticate. And this gives you an additional layer of protection, because you cannot have, even